What they are actually saying is they've got a temporomandibular disorder. So that can be vascular, it can be neurologic, it can be muscular, or it can be joint derangements. So it's an all-encompassing term. So it's no longer appropriate to say that you've got TMJ. TMJ is temporomandibular joint disorder. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to repeat. Lateral ligament and the temporomandibular ligament. That's what causes the switch from location to translation.
Yes. It limits the motion.
It limits the motion?
Yeah.
So does it not allow the...
It goes from here around behind the head of the condyle. So it'll only allow for movement to a certain distance, and then it requires the jaw to be pulled forward by the lateral.
So rotation has the stretch, not ligament.
Right. So it's allowed so much movement. It doesn't really stretch it until you get to 20 millimeters open, because it's free to rotate around it, because it's rotating around the center. What does the joint rotate around? Okay, we never talked about it, but it's an artificial line drawn between the two medial poles, and it's called the horizontal hinge axis, or the hinge axis. We'll talk about it later in lecture, but the problem is there is no real thing as a hinge axis, because if you remember, the condyles are at angles to one another. So if you think that it's an axis going through the condyles, which is what a lot of people think, you have two independent axes which will never coincide, so you could never rotate around them. Okay? Which is why we didn't want to talk about that until now. Okay, so then we got our muscles. The muscles are the engine which allows us to do the motions. The muscles of mastication are how many? 4. What are they? Okay. And how many bellies does a masseter have? How many bellies does a masseter have? 2. How many does the temporalis have? 3. Oh, yeah. Anterior, middle, and posterior. How many on the lateral pterygoid? 2. And how many on the medial pterygoid? 1.
Is lateral pterygoid the smallest?
Lateral pterygoid is the smallest muscle of mastication. It does sound like a good question. Yeah, I actually like that. Wouldn't be on the national board, but I could do that. Okay. Now, the other thing is, if the lateral pterygoid is the smallest muscle, lateral pterygoid, right? What does it do? We're going to classify it as a muscle. Depressor and okay. We're classifying it as a muscle. It's either an elevator or a depressor.
No, it's a depressor and also allows for protrusion.
It allows for protrusion. Yeah. But its
Primary function is depression.
What is it studying?
Yeah. Okay. Understand? So it's, now, how many muscles is it? One little muscle? No, it's one muscle with 2 heads.
Yeah.
One muscle, 2 bellies. Okay, it gets assistance from what muscles to help open the mouth?
Right in front.
Digastric also.
Okay, but that's a suprahilar muscle.
Yeah.
Okay, so suprahyaloid and infrahyaloid muscles. So anything that pulls the floor of the mouth down to help for swallowing helps to open the mouth. Now, have you ever heard that you can hold an alligator's jaws closed with one hand? Oh, come on. Somebody had to watch Wild Kingdom a little bit. Oh, why is that? Huh? Why can you do it?
They don't have any vessels.
They don't have any, or they're very small like ours. So we can bite through just about anything, but have you ever gotten a real sticky candy stuck between your teeth? Come on, I hope you guys all are all kids at home. Okay. You ever get something really sticky between your teeth and you try and open it, sometimes your lateral pterygoid isn't strong enough. Now, you may have the same problem in the clinic with certain dental impressions and other things. So remember, you may have to assist them if they need a depressor. You'll never have to assist them if they want to elevate. Oh, and by the way, when you have your fingers in a patient's mouth, because remember these elevator muscles, never say, okay, close. Because they close like a snapping turtle. With about 300 pounds of force per square inch. And these little guys are your future. You can't do it being a stubby. Okay? And they don't think about it. So what you do is you say, slowly and gently close. But be ready to get your fingers out of there in a hurry. I only say that because I had my fingers between a patient who had dental implants in both arches yesterday. Yeah. I have smacked patients. And sometimes they fall asleep on you and they just kind of get up. Okay. Now, so we got everything else develops before these little guys. Right? Promise, they do. The problem is, these little guys win out. Okay? Because there's way more nerves in the teeth than there are that supply everything else. So it fools the brain as to thinking the teeth are more important. The problem is the muscles are strong and they want to win. So if you don't have that anatomic harmony, there will be a constant battle, consciously or subconsciously, between where the muscles want to put the mandible and where the teeth think the mandible should be. Okay? That creates bruxism and clenching and occlusal interferences and fractured teeth. Okay? So hopefully you're seeing how, as we've pieced everything together, you can't do something in one part of the system without affecting the other part. Okay? So our determinants of occlusion, how many determinants of occlusion? 4. And they are? Okay, neuromuscular, right and left joints in the anterior guidance. They all have to be in harmony with one another, right? Ideally. Because if not, you will set up problems. So you can have perfect TMJs, anterior guidance, and a messed up neuromuscular response, and you'll wipe out your teeth. You can have a great neuromuscular response, no anterior guidance, you're going to have a tendency to wipe out the posterior teeth. Yes?
What kind of technique do you use for neuromuscular? I know, as far as that is related to
You can do biofeedback, you can do hypnosis. Sometimes if it's muscular, you can do Botox. I mean, I've always thought a good piffing would work. Lobotomy, piffing. Oh, okay. Now we remember that the eruption of teeth is guided by the neutral zone, right?